say, "May the Kotlovitch young lady be your bride, please God." And Ariadne herself knew I loved her. She would often ride over on horseback or drive in the char à banc to see us, and would spend whole days with me and my father. She made great friends with the old man, and he even taught her to bicycle, which was his favourite amusement. I remember helping her to get on the bicycle one evening, and she looked so lovely that I felt as though I were burning my hands when I touched her. I shuddered with rapture, and when the two of them, my old father and she, both looking so handsome and elegant, bicycled side by side along the main road, a black horse ridden by the steward dashed aside on meeting them, and it seemed to me that it dashed aside because it too was overcome by her beauty. My love, my worship touched Ariadne and softened her. She had a passionate longing to be captivated like me, and to respond with the same love. It was so poetical. But she was really incapable of loving as I did, for she was cold and already somewhat corrupted. There was a demon in her, whispering to her night and day that she was enchanting, adorable, and having no definite idea for what object she was created, or for what purpose life had been given her. She never pictured herself in the future except as wealthy and distinguished. She had visions of balls, races, liveries, of sumptuous drawing-rooms, of a salon of her own, and of a perfect swarm of counts, princes, ambassadors, celebrated painters and artists, all of them adoring her and in ecstasies over her beauty and her dresses. This thirst for personal success, and this continual concentration of the mind in one direction makes people cold, and Ariadne was cold, to me, to nature, and to music. Meanwhile time was passing, and still there were no ambassadors on the scene. Ariadne went on living with her brother, the spiritualist. Things went from bad to worse, so that she had nothing to buy hats and dresses with, and had to resort to all sorts of tricks and dodges to conceal her poverty. As luck would have it, a certain Prince Maktuev, a wealthy man, but an utterly insignificant person, had paid his addresses to her when she was living at her aunt's in Moscow. She had refused him point blank, but now she was fretted by the worm of repentance that she had refused him, just as a peasant pouts with repulsion at a mug of kvass with cockroaches in it, but yet drinks it. So she frowned disdainfully at the recollection of the prince, and yet she would say to me, "Say what you like, there is something inexplicable, fascinating in a title." She dreamed of a title, of a brilliant position, and at the same time she did not want to let me go. However one may dream of ambassadors, one's heart is not a stone, and one has wistful feelings for one's youth. Ariadne tried to fall in love, made a show of being in love, and even swore that she loved me. But I am a highly strung and sensitive man. When I am loved, I feel it even at a distance, without vows and assurances. At once I felt, as it were, a coldness in the air, and when she talked of love, it seemed to me as though I were listening to the singing of a metal nightingale. Ariadne was herself aware that she was lacking in something. She was vexed, and more than once I saw her cry. Another time, can you imagine, all of a sudden she embraced me and kissed me. It happened in the evening on the river bank, and I saw by her eyes that she did not love me, but was embracing me from curiosity, to test herself and to see what came of it. And I felt dreadful. I took her hands and said to her in despair, "These caresses without love cause me suffering." "What a queer fellow you are," she said with annoyance, and walked away. Another year or two might have passed, and in all probability I should have married her, and so my story would have ended, but fate was pleased to arrange our romance differently. It happened that a new personage appeared on our horizon. Ariadne's brother had a visit from an old university friend called Mihail Ivanitch Lubkov, a charming man of whom coachmen and footmen used to say, "an entertaining gentleman." He was a man of medium height, lean and bald, with a face like a good-natured bourgeois, not interesting, but pale and presentable, with a stiff, well-kept moustache, with a neck like a goose skin, and a big Adam's apple. He used to wear pince-nez on a wide black ribbon, lisped, and could not pronounce either R or L. He was always in good spirits. Everything amused him. He had made an exceedingly foolish marriage at 20, and had acquired 2 houses in Moscow as part of his wife's dowry. He began doing them up and building a bath-house and was completely ruined. Now his wife and 4 children lodged in Oriental buildings in great poverty, and he had to support them, and this amused him. He was 36, and his wife was by now 42, and that too amused him. His mother, a conceited, sulky personage with aristocratic pretensions, despised his wife and lived apart with a perfect menagerie of cats and dogs, and he had to allow her 75 roubles a month also. He was, too, a man of taste. Like lunching at the Slaviansky Bazaar and dining at the Hermitage, he needed a great deal of money, but his uncle only allowed him 2,000 roubles a year, which was not enough, and for days together he would run about Moscow with his tongue out, as the saying is, looking for someone to borrow from, and this, too, amused him. He had come to Kotlovitch to find in the lap of nature, as he said, a rest from family life. At dinner, at supper, and on our walks, he talked about his wife, his mother, his creditors, the bailiffs, and laughed at them. He laughed at himself, and assured us that, thanks to his talent for borrowing, he had made a great number of agreeable acquaintances. He laughed without ceasing, and we laughed too. Moreover, in his company we spent our time differently. I was more inclined to quiet, so to say, idyllic pleasures. I liked fishing, evening walks, gathering mushrooms. Lubkov preferred picnics, fireworks, hunting. He used to get up picnics 3 times a week, and Ariadne, with an earnest and inspired face, used to write a list of oysters, champagne, sweets, and used to send me into Moscow to get them, without inquiring, of course, whether I had money. And at the picnics there were toasts and laughter, and again mirthful descriptions of how old his wife was, what fat lapdogs his mother had, and what charming people his creditors were. Lubkov was fond of nature, but he regarded it as something long familiar and, at the same time, in reality, infinitely beneath himself, and created for his pleasure. He would sometimes stand still before some magnificent landscape and say, "It would be nice to have tea here." One day, seeing Ariadne walking in the distance with a parasol, he nodded towards her and said, "She's thin, and that's what I like. I don't like fat women." This made me wince. I asked him not to speak like that about women before me. He looked at me in surprise and said, "What is there amiss in my liking thin women and not caring for fat ones?" I made no answer. Afterwards, being in very good spirits and a trifle elevated, he said, "I've noticed Ariadne Grigoryevna likes you. I can't understand why you don't go in and win." His words made me feel uncomfortable, and with some embarrassment I told him how I looked at love and women. "I don't know," he sighed. "To my thinking, a woman's a woman and a man's a man. Ariadne Grigoryevna may be poetical and exalted, as you say, but it doesn't follow that she must be superior to the laws of nature. You see for yourself that she has reached the age where she must have a husband or a lover. I respect women as much as you do, but I don't think certain relations exclude poetry. Poetry is one thing and love is another. It's just the same as it is in farming. The beauty of nature is one thing, and the income from your forests or fields is quite another." When Ariadne and I were fishing, Lubkov would lie in the sand close by and make fun of me, or lecture me on the conduct of life. "I wonder, my dear sir, how you can live without a love affair," he would say. "You are young, handsome, interesting. In fact, you're a man not to be sniffed at. Yet you live like a monk. Ugh, I can't stand these fellows who are old at 28. I'm nearly 10 years older than you are, and yet which of us is the younger? Ariadne Grigoryevna, which?" "You, of course," Ariadne answered. And when he was bored with our silence and the attention with which we stared at our floats, he went home, and she said, looking at me angrily, "You're really not a man, but a mush, God forgive me. A man ought to be able to be carried away by his feelings. He ought to be able to be mad, to make mistakes, to suffer. A woman will forgive you audacity and insolence, but she will never forgive your reasonableness." She was angry and earnest, and went on, "To succeed, a man must be resolute and bold. Lubkov is not so handsome as you are, but he is more interesting. He will always succeed with women, because he's not like you. He's a man." And there was actually a note of exasperation in her voice. One day at supper she began saying, not addressing me, that if she were a man she would not stagnate in the country, but would travel, would spend the winter somewhere abroad, in Italy, for instance. Oh, Italy! At this point my father unconsciously poured oil on the flames. He began telling us at length about Italy, how splendid it was there, the exquisite scenery, the museums. Ariadne suddenly conceived a burning desire to go to Italy. She positively brought her fist down on the table, and her eyes flashed as she said, "I must go." After that came conversations every day about Italy, how splendid it would be in Italy. Ah, Italy! Oh, Italy! And when Ariadne looked at me over her shoulder, from her cold and obstinate expression, I saw that in her dreams she had already conquered Italy with all its salons, celebrated foreigners and tourists, and there was no holding her back now. I advised her to wait a little, to put off her tour for a year or two, but she frowned disdainfully and said, "You're as prudent as an old woman." Lubkov was in favour of the tour. He said it could be done very